Hello and welcome to another episode of TJs One of Us here at the Always Next Year podcast studios. I am the host, Shane. I'm joined by Rob Gilmore, and we are, for the first time, we're bringing on our Canadian friend, Connor Donald. Connor, how are you, sir?
Great. And how about yourself?
I'm doing well. For all of the people who listen to TJs One of Us who have yet to listen to one of our Crossing Borders or one of your Kelly Green Hours, which, by the way, if you're not listening to those things, do the right thing. Subscribe to those shows as well. Connor, why don't you let everyone know where we can get you at Twitter, just because I know I may forget at the end.
You can find me at Connor10 on Twitter.
All right. And Rob, we already know we got you at radio_Rob.
That is correct.
All right. So we're going to jump into some of this. 76ers win a incredibly crucial game two up north in Toronto. But before we dive into the first two games of those series, Connor, you were from Canada. So you had mentioned in our group chat that you do have several Rockets fans near where you live. What's the mood like right now up where you're at in terms of that Rocket fan base?
Or Rocket fan base,
Raptor fan base.
I was going to say, I think it's the Raptors.
It is the Raptors. Apparently maybe Steve's drunkenness has carried over to me.
Yeah, so I got a ton of friends who are Raptors fans. All my buddies are, and I just get, after game one, they rightfully so gave me a hell of a time, and it was pretty damn quiet the other day. So
it's gotta be interesting being a Philly sports fan up there.
You know what? You'd be surprised to know that actually it's more, there's a lot of Flyers fans, and typical bandwagon fashion, I'm seeing a lot more Eagles stuff. But
of course.
But yeah, no, it's different. It's different, especially because they know what the fan base is like. So they're like, "Oh, you're a Philly fan. You must be like one of those people." But
we are one of those people.
We absolutely are one of those people. I'm not one of those guys eating dog shit and climbing poles after we win games. So.
Well, we appreciate that, because when you do come to Philly and PA and visit us and stay at the studio here, we would like you to not eat shit. So game one, game two, tale of two very, very, very different stories. Game one, we'll start with that a little bit here. Game one, just about everything that could go wrong did go wrong. You know, it was the starters not meshing. You know, it was we couldn't find an answer for Kawhi, which we're not going to find an answer for Kawhi. There's a reason he's one of the best players in the world, if not the best player in the world. Siakam really showing out in this series in game one. Game two, putting Joe on him. Nice move. Rob, I want to get your thoughts on game one. What do you think was the most pivotal issue in game one that really did kind of hold the 76ers back from ever really being in that game?
Well, game one, offensively, it was a lack of execution. They weren't getting good plays in. They weren't really moving the ball around. Ben was ineffective. And that was really, offensively, that was the biggest thing. Defensively, Kawhi just destroyed him. What, he had 45 points, I believe, a career high. They couldn't stop him. And it's one thing when Kawhi's beating you, but when Kawhi and Pascal Siakam are both going off, that's going to cause problems. And that was the issue in game one. And like you said, they were able to Kawhi still put up his numbers in game two. Siakam, though, he was held in check by Embiid. I thought that was the biggest difference. But in game one, that was the biggest thing.
Connor, what was it for you as you were watching game one there? That kind of rang true as probably the most impactful thing that led to that game one loss.
I think it was just we were so off with our shooting. I think, well, that's been a story of the entire playoffs, is just we cannot get a full team shooting well over in any span or stretch of games. I mean, we shot 39.3% in game one, and you would think that the way game two went, it was any better, but it was 39.5%. So I think the thing that's ringing true right now throughout the playoffs is just we cannot get consistent shooting, and that could be because Joel Embiid seems to think he should be at the three-point line taking three-pointers, but I think there's a lot of other issues besides that. But that defense in game one was just pure sloppy. There's nothing I can really say positively was great in game one.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was truest for me was we were a team that was unprepared, both in the game one of Brooklyn series and then the game one of this series. It was true in both of these games that Brett Brown and his guys came in, and it seemed as though they were not sure as to the strengths and weaknesses of their opponents. Which is concerning in the Brooklyn series because it was so apparent as to what beat them all year from Brooklyn. It was something that Brett Brown had echoed stupidly in me and Connor's opinion from Crossing Borders, basically stating, that we fear Brooklyn was the takeaway from his early comments prior to that series. You know what you're getting in Toronto. You know what Kawhi is. You know what Siakam is. The unknown in this particular circumstance was the fact that they shipped out Valanciunas for Marc Gasol. In some minds, that was a positive thing because Valanciunas gave Embiid fits, but so does Marc Gasol. But the big thing in game one was that they just didn't seem prepared with a game plan that would have been effective against either opponent. And I think the biggest things that changed for me was not necessarily in the execution. And Connor, you brought up the stat line in terms of the shooting and execution there. And Rob, you questioned their offensive execution in game one. It was very similar in game two. But their overall game plan, and especially the point of defensive attack and assignments, that was the biggest difference for me, game one to game two. In that game one, Jimmy Butler was bad. That was, it seems like we're getting very bipolar Jimmy Butler here in terms of stat lines and involvements. Game one was the Jimmy Butler that said, this is the guy that you don't want to pay. Enter game two. Jimmy Butler became Jimmy Butler again, whom we assumed we were going to be getting, and the reason we made those mid-season trades. Rob, for you, what was it, about game two, the differences in Jimmy Butler specifically, before we get to some of the defensive changes, but both of you guys brought up offensive points, so I want to kind of stay in that realm for a second. What was it for you about Jimmy Butler in game two that gave you the most confidence going forward in this series?
Well, the fact that the Sixers, they put the ball in his hands. I mean, he was bringing the ball up more often than Ben was in game two. And the fact that he seemed to be more confident. He had that 4-point play. Actually, it was essentially a 5-point play early on in the game because of a technical foul against Toronto. And the fact that, he went out there and he did what we expect him to do. He took over the game in the fourth quarter. So that was the biggest thing for Jimmy, is to be able to come through in the big situations like that. And also, like I said, the fact that he was given more responsibility, being the guy who was taking the ball up the court and being.
You drop out there, Rob.
What's that?
You dropped out there.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, the fact that Jimmy he was the guy who was bringing the ball up the court.
There you go.
And, in the half court, you need to have Jimmy with the ball because Ben's ineffective there. So in the half court, giving Jimmy the ball, letting him do his thing, and just letting him be the more or less the captain of the offense in that situation, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, on the Jimmy Butler takeover here, I mentioned it leading into the postseason here, stating that, we acquired Jimmy to be the closer in these close games, to be the closer in the games that even aren't that close. The playoffs of the fourth quarter of this season, you need Jimmy Butler for 48 minutes. You need that version, and it's nights like that where you get it. Going along with Jimmy Butler, you need your other stars to be stars, and I felt like Tobias was the lone star of the four that didn't really show up in game two. He had two different stretches where he was okay, but Ben played phenomenal defense on Kawhi. Just Kawhi's going to get his, but he made him work for it. But Joel Embiid comes in sick. He's clearly not right. And Connor, you had mentioned that he takes too many threes for your liking, and I know that that's a very split thing here for Philadelphia. Me and Rob argue and debate this all the time. But Connor, how would you evaluate what Joe was able to do on just 2 of 7 shooting on that night, and really ineffective on the offensive side until that closing 2 minutes?
Yeah, I find I know it's a topic of debate, but Joel is not meant to be out at the 3-point line. And I think especially when he's not feeling 100%. Like, I think he has to play the mismatch. He's gotta take advantage of. I know when Gasol's out there, it gives him a hard time, but if you got Serge Ibaka under there, you got to take advantage of those mismatches. He's got to go to that hoop. We have enough guys who can cover that 3-point line, and I find that when he's out at the 3-point line, he's just ineffective because we have nobody in there. We have nobody playing in there. So I found he did become effective at the end, but look, just like you alluded to, that you need Jimmy Butler for 48 minutes. Well, we need Joel Embiid for however many minutes he's out on the court. If he's going to be out there for 20 minutes, we need him to be fully effective for 20 minutes to the best of his ability. And I know, like, there was times they were showing him and he was coughing and he was not looking his best. But if he can, instead of the final 2 minutes, play like that for the 20 minutes he's on the court, I think that would be a huge, like, game-changing, series shifting moment for the Sixers.
Joel Embiid, no doubt, he's the best 76er on the court when healthy and when right, which he has obviously not been throughout this entire playoff series. But this team does roll specifically through the success of him for the most part in offense. And I think Rob and I both kind of tend to agree with you that almost everyone in the NBA, he has a mismatch on underneath the basket. That guy is so quick for what he is, and he moves so well, and he has just a multitude of different moves that he does have in the low post that he can get around. And he's so creative, and he draws so much contact, and he gets to the free throw line. That, to me, has to be the game plan. When you can operate in a fast-paced environment and Ben is bringing the ball up in transition, that's option one. That means you're playing great defense, you're active on the boards, and you're running. You're getting down court quick. That's when that operates through Ben Simmons. But the minute that you get to that half court, Rob, you said it correctly. That's when Jimmy Butler kind of takes over, and it's now Jimmy Butler's vision and Jimmy Butler's play. That needs to go through Joel Embiid. Once that ball enters the half court and they've slowed down and set up, that needs to be where you need to maximize the talent there. Rob, has your perception of what you want Joel Embiid doing changed at all? Do you want him at the 3-point line? I think it was kind of a necessity thing out of in the current series because he is not well. I think it's easier for him to kind of hang back and not bang bodies when he's trying to not literally get sick on the court. But has your perception changed on how much you want him out there hanging at the top of the arc?
No, it hasn't. I'm still in favor of him staying down low where he's most effective. Yes, he was sick. That was a factor for him not doing that much in game 2, but I think he should be good to go for game 3, and I'm hoping to see him have more of a low post presence because while I do enjoy the threat of him shooting a 3 ball and he can make them at a pretty decent clip for a big guy, it's not his game. His game is working the low post, and when he's down there, he's the most dominant center in all of basketball. So that's what the Sixers need him to be doing if they want to win the series.
I agree. Again, I think that is the most integral thing for the 76ers long term. I do think that Ben Simmons can take over, a game or a 6-minute clip. Obviously, Jimmy Butler is what Jimmy Butler is, but if the Sixers are going to be a long-term threat in this year's playoffs, it is going to be whether or not Joel Embiid can be Joel Embiid. So one thing that I will talk about every single show segment that we have is Brett Brown. So I got into arguments, over Twitter during Game 2 because people consistently sat there and were calling out Brett Brown for the faults and failures of what was going on in any given one single play. I thought, not unlike the Brooklyn series, that Brett Brown's game plan and his reaction to the things that did not go right and did not go well in Game 1, he came out and answered every one of those questions. And he did it again with another limited bench and with a limited superstar in Joel Embiid, who was not healthy. How would you guys rate the game or the game plan and overall coaching performance of Brett Brown in Game 2 of this series? We'll start with you, Connor.
I'm still, we've talked about him before on Crossing Borders. I'm still not sold on him. I think one of the big things, like, I guess I'll start with my rating. If we're going to go on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give him a 6. I think he adjusted the defense a lot better. But the big thing is that offense. Like, he made the adjustments to the defense, but in order for us to beat the Raptors, we have to play the game at our pace. Even right out of the half, in Canada, they interviewed the Raptors assistant, and he was saying we let the Sixers control the pace too often. And I think we all too often try and go at the pace the Raptors are, but we're not that fast. We're just not that fast. We can't compete on that scale. They do pick and rolls, they do it all, and they do it so flawlessly and so quickly. And I think that Brett Brown has to figure out a way so that we're not 5 guys standing around the 3-point line taking unnecessary and unwarranted 3 balls. We need to control the pace. We need to get Joel inside. We need to work the ball around, get the ball out of Redick's hands until he can shoot a 3-ball again, and control the pace. We just have to control the pace on offense. And if we can get that and do what we did on defense, where we actually kept the Raptors to their lowest total home score of the entire season, if we can get that defense and then an offense where we're controlling the pace, we are good. But it seems like we can't get both out of Brett Brown. He adjusts one thing and does extremely well, but he doesn't do the other, or he does neither.
So, Rob, 2 of the biggest things and critical changes that I had seen through this was all right, well, we'll go with 3. Game 1, he pulled half the starters very early on in the first quarter, and the game was getting away from him fast, and they never really recovered. That didn't happen without him at least attempting to stop those runs in game 2. Connor mentioned quarter 3 wasn't super strong, and then certainly late in the fourth quarter when things got a little more interesting there as well. But he did his job. He used timeouts appropriately. He changed the offensive schematic from trying to push to slowing things down, and as Connor mentioned, controlling that pace. The other 2 things that he did, and we'll put it in one, is he switched Ben Simmons to Kawhi, and he put in Siakam, who is an athletic freak. He put Joel Embiid, an unhealthy Joel Embiid, but he put an unhealthy Joel Embiid on Siakam. Kawhi got his. Siakam's stat line was significantly better if you're a Sixers fan compared to the numbers that he put up in game 1. How much do you credit Brett Brown for those decisions there, and how much of an impact do you think they'll make in his game plan going forward, especially in the 2 games in Philly? Because Ben really did make Kawhi earn every point that he had in game 2. And Joel, as unhealthy as he was in game 2, did really well against Siakam. So what, with those, do you see going forward here for Brett Brown? How much do you credit that?
I'll give Brett Brown a good amount of credit for that. Just finding good matchups that worked out well for the team. Embiid doesn't get enough credit for his defense. Everybody looks at his offensive game and sees that he's one of the best centers in basketball, if not the best. And people forget about how good he is at the defensive end on what's relatively a kind of a weak defensive team for the Sixers. And he's been able to hold it down at center all season long when he's been healthy. So you want him on Siakam, and that worked out really well in game 2. I give Brown a lot of credit for figuring that out and going with that matchup and putting Ben on Kawhi. I mean, that's something that should have been done for the get-go. I'm happy that Brown came around and did it in game 2. Like you said, Kawhi made 45 points look easy in game 1 and then came out, and he still put up his numbers in game 2, but he definitely had to earn it. So I give Brown credit for figuring that one out as well. And I think that they need to stick with those matchups because that's you don't fix what ain't broke. And that worked in game 2. And I think that going forward, if Embiid is fully healthy and he's performing better at the offensive end, that it's going to work out well for them going forward in this series.
So before we move on into the upcoming games and the 2 games in Philadelphia. Do you guys have any final thoughts on what you noticed and things that, good or bad takeaways from those first 2 games in Toronto?
First off, I like the fact that they won a low-scoring game because it seems like every game that they won this season has been a high-scoring kind of shootout. I'm happy that they were able to beat Toronto in a low-scoring defensive battle. It shows me that they've done it before, or they've done it once now, and I think that they can do it again if they need to.
That's that Boston logic for you.
Exactly. Exactly. But I think the offense is going to come around with the next 2 games in Philadelphia, and like I said, with a healthier Embiid, putting up better numbers at the offensive end. But I like the fact that they were able to win a low-scoring game.
Connor, do you have any final thoughts on the first 2 games up your way?
No, I mean, I guess the big thing, like in game 2, we didn't really make mention of was just how much better they did on the rebounding. When I looked at the stats, they were almost tied in game 1, and then they out-rebounded them 53-36 this time around, it's extremely impressive when you control the boards like that. And like when I looked, they were tied in offensive rebounds, but they owned the defensive rebounds. So I think it's important to continue to push the rebounding big time and being aggressive off the boards, taking advantage of those times where the Raptors might be a little slower. And then I think just the turnovers were an issue. They had 14 and 19 in games 1 and 2. I think that has to change, but I mean, I think that can come in due time, just like the offense. And once the offense is clicking, I think you'll see less turnovers. So.
You make a good point about the rebounds. I do appreciate the fact that they're able to collect all those defensive rebounds because Toronto is a team that will kill you with second chance points if you give them an opportunity. So to prevent that, that's key for the rest of the series.
It also lends to, Rob, you mentioned this was a grinded out defensive style win. But if they can control the glass, and especially the defensive boards there, and eliminate the second chance points that you've mentioned, it leads to their transition play, and it maximizes the strengths of Ben Simmons' offensive approach and game and mindset. And it, again, makes you have to defend that many more different styles of play from the Philadelphia 76ers, and it will create that much more of a mismatch for Philadelphia in Philadelphia for games 3 and 4. This is going to bring us to processing thoughts. So this is just an intersegment segment piece here that we're starting to throw into all of our segments, or almost all of our segments now, is where this is mainly just personality and fun. So processing thoughts, we're going to give a quick thought on any member of the process era years, these 5-6 years that we've had here, wondering what the hell these people are doing right now. So I gave the examples when we first started going through this. Is on a serious note, you could sit there and say, I do genuinely wonder this. What would Tony Wroten look like on this team? He was my favorite process era Sixer. I love Tony Wroten, a shoot first guy. He could shoot 45 shots a night. He could shoot 4. He may score 30 points. He may score 3. You're not getting a lick of defense out of him, but damn it, he was going to shoot the basketball. And at times, I feel like this team really lacks that. My second one, this is a little bit less serious, is Sergio Rodriguez. Does he know that he is the ugliest man and ugliest athlete in Philadelphia since Tyrone Hill? I don't think that he did for his 35 games or whatever it was here 3 years ago. I'm going to throw it to you first, Connor, here. Give me any type of thought that you have during any process era Sixer and what they're doing right now.
Okay, so mine comes from our good friend Jahlil Okafor. I asked myself, does Okafor did he know that he was lazy and could not adapt to the modern NBA when he wasted Hinkie's pick? Do you think he knew that he was gonna just be a completely wasted pick because he was just lazy and unwilling to adapt? That was kind of where I was looking at
Jahlil. And it's a damn shame. He waited too long to go vegan and get himself all healthy and right, because by that time, no one gave a shit about him. Dollar to the swear jar. But poor Jahlil Okafor. That's a solid pick, and he is sitting on his couch right now. Rob.
My thought is, how the hell is Jakar Sampson still in the NBA?
Jakar Sampson. Yes.
As Mike is about to clear the bases here with a double, but back to
Solid.
yeah, Jakar Sampson was one of the worst basketball players I've ever seen, and he's out there pretty much every night with his process era Sixers, and he was terrible. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't shoot. He couldn't defend. He couldn't dunk. Maybe he dunked every once in a while, but he's still with the Bulls right now, and
That's
granted
why
they're a
he's in the
terrible
NBA,
team,
by the way.
but still, he shouldn't even be playing pro basketball in North America. If he's playing pro basketball, it should be over in Europe, and somehow he's on an NBA team.
The Bulls. Let's call it for what it is. We'll stay in some of the personality stuff here because I feel like we're going to get lost in conversation when we finally do dive back into games 3 and 4 and beyond here in this series. So we're going to go to the next intersegment segment called Hinkie's Cell Phone. We're going to think, if you could just close your eyes just for a minute as a listener, sit there and think, if you were to open up the cell phone of Sam Hinkie, what is one thing that you personally believe 100% is on his cell phone? Mine is that I believe that there is a picture of Joel Embiid and Sam Hinkie drinking Shirley Temples, playing process era Guess Who on the Rocky Steps of Philadelphia. I feel as though that picture truly exists in the cell phone of Sam Hinkie. Went with Connor first last time. We'll go to Rob. Rob, on Hinkie's cell phone, what is something that you truly believe you would find?
I think that he's got a whole gallery, a whole collection of memes making fun of Brian Colangelo.
Burn Colangelo down. I dig that. And Connor, what is one thing that you believe is on Sam Hinkie's cell phone?
I think me and Rob are on the same page because I said that there would be text messages saving the process and teaching Colangelo how to get out of a career in the NBA. I think we're in the same boat.
Oh, that's perfect. I love it. All right, so we are going to have some of those intersegment segments on, like I said, almost every segment that we do have here at the Always Next Year Podcast Studios. So remember those. Use the hashtags throughout. You guys can text us. You guys can tweet at us, giving us your thoughts for processing thoughts or Hinkie's cell phone, and we will say the best responses on these shows.
You know what else might be on Hinkie's cell phone?
What else?
The login information for Colangelo's burger accounts.
That's actually perfect. I think that's the best response we had. Oh, God. All right, so we're going to bring it back on task here to wrap it up on the second half of this, the second half of TJ's One of Us here. And we're going to go into the assessment of the games 3, 4, and beyond and some of our expectations. So we talked a lot about some of the adjustments that were made from game 1 into game 2. Brett Brown's improvements. We talked about Jimmy Butler being Jimmy Butler, playing 42, 43 minutes, whatever it was. We talked about being able to win a close, grinded out type of game. Wells Fargo Center is going to be rocking. We're getting Mike Scott back on the bench now. We don't know how much we're going to get out of him, how healthy he may be, but there are reports that he is going to play. He has begun practicing with the team again today, so we should have a little bit more of a bench.
The regional manager.
The regional manager. What is your expectation of? We'll start with the atmosphere of the Wells Fargo Center. We know that for Philadelphia Flyers games, it's a freaking library. Rob, we talk about it all the time on your show. And for 76ers games, you can't hear yourself think. It is electric in that building. It's hard to believe that it is, in fact, the same building. So we'll start with the atmosphere. What do you think that the environment's going to be like, and who do you guys think is going to ring the bell on Thursday night for this game? We'll start with you, Connor.
Oh my gosh, I have no clue who will ring the bell. I can't even imagine some of the
Sam
names.
Hinkie.
That would be
Just
great.
once.
That
Just
would be
once.
great. But maybe even Brian Colangelo. Why not? Why not just go all out? Bring them out together. They can ring it together. But yeah, the atmosphere is going to be crazy. Just like I mean, I hate to say it, and I've seen a game in Toronto, but that atmosphere is nuts too. You got two of the craziest atmospheres. You basically go from one right to the other, and I think it'll be huge for us to have those fans and to have all that support and to get back onto American soil. I mean, that's weird to say I'm a Canadian, but I mean, just to
Not
be
weird
back.
at all. We welcome you as one of our own.
just to be back at home at the Wells Fargo, I think that'll be huge especially for like Joel Embiid and stuff who maybe not healthy, but that might be the little added boost that he needs to really put him over the top, being in his crowd and just going crazy with them.
Rob, who do you think will ring the bell, and what do you think the atmosphere is going to be like?
I think it's going to be Iverson because I think they're going to throw it back to that 2001, that great 2001 series where Iverson and Vince Carter were trading 50-point games. And that's a great memory that a lot of us Sixers fans who have been around long enough remember. So I think they'll because of that, they'll bring back Iverson for ringing the bell for at least game 3, maybe game 4. He probably only does it for one game, though. But I'm expecting them to win both. I've said it a number of times. I expect them to win both games here in Philadelphia. I think that game 3 might be close. And then after that, maybe we get in their heads a little bit, and it's a little bit more of a blowout in game 4. I guess what the biggest thing that I want to stay the same, obviously, is the defense from the last game. The defense was great, hands down, very good. What I want to see more of is Joel Embiid buckets, and as I've said a couple of times, I think that if he's feeling a bit better, that won't be an issue. That he'll be able to go out there and dominate at the offensive end. Another thing that I want to see is I want to see Jimmy Butler continue to play clutch Jimmy Butler basketball. If he can do that, then the Sixers are going to win the series.
So I think the thing that you mentioned there, that you most want to see is their continued defense from game 2. Do you have any actual concerns long term about playing 42, 43, 44 minutes a night for some of these guys? Jimmy Butler's going to play 40 plus. Ben Simmons is going to play 40 plus. If Joel Embiid is not pooping on the court, he's probably playing 32, 35, 38 minutes. Tobias Harris going to play 40 some minutes. To play with that level of intensity on the defensive side, to lock down a guy like Kawhi Leonard, to lock down Siakam, to be able to fight through screens in the ways that they do, that's a lot because our bench, now again, getting Mike Scott back is a big thing, but primarily our success is going to be in what we can do with the starters on the court and how we can minimize damages and runs in the 2 and 4 minute stretches that we need to play an Amir Johnson or a Greg Monroe or the Mike Scott or Jared Ennis. How much concern do you guys have that the physicality of the playoffs and the intensity of the playoffs and playing a team as good as Toronto is just going to wear down the defensive intensity that the 76ers can put forth? Rob, since you mentioned it, we'll throw it to you.
I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue. I think that these guys, Ben Simmons is perfectly fine with playing a long game. So is Jimmy. So is Toby. I think that Joel, maybe you limit his minutes a little bit if he's still not 100%. But like I said, I think that it's not going to be a huge issue because I think that game 2 they were able to figure out Toronto and they're able to, like I said, they got the matchups they wanted, and now that they figured out how to beat them, especially coming back home, they're going to feed off the energy of the crowd. They're going to play a more energetic game, and I don't see it being a huge issue for this team.
Connor, how about you? You have any actual lasting concerns that the physicality of the playoffs and the talent and skill that Toronto has will wear down the 76ers' intensity on the defensive side of the ball?
I'm going to disagree with Rob on this one because I actually do have genuine concerns about it. I did notice you could see it with maybe not Jimmy Butler, but it seemed like Ben Simmons as the game wore on in that fourth quarter. He was gassed. He was having a hard time keeping up. And you gotta, when you're chasing the Raptors, like they're like the Energizer Bunny. They just don't stop, man. And every time, like especially that second half, we were slamming into those picks, and they were getting the open shots. How do you think they peeled back 19 points on us? Like I genuinely believe it's a concern, especially because, Joel Embiid, they will force the minutes, but I have concern that forcing the minutes is not good. We need, as much as we hate Monroe, we need him to perform like he did in game 2, which was slightly better, tolerable at least to have him on the court. But Jimmy, I don't think it's an issue. Harris, when you're watching the game, I don't really notice Harris as much as the others. And then there's Simmons is the one I'd be most concerned about, but I genuinely think that if our bench doesn't start to produce a bit more, I have concerns that could be our demise going forward, because I have this game going 7 games, and I would not be surprised to see the Eastern Conference Finals go 7 games as well.
I'm with you, Connor. I noticed the same things in Ben Simmons in that fourth quarter. I think it was 3 straight possessions, or 3 out of 4 or 5 possessions down the floor. Kawhi got, an and one. And it was with Ben being just a hair late, and just being beat. And Ben played at a high clip all night. He was, you mentioned it, trying to keep up with Toronto and trying to keep up with Kawhi in particular, who I'm pretty sure is not a human being. He very well may just be a machine that has zero emotion or anything and joy in his life. He just plays basketball.
He absolutely is, and I'm jealous. I wish we could get someone like that. If we had Ben Simmons and he was like that, he had that laugh and he was all robotic, I'd love it. I'd love it.
That laugh. That was absurd. Yeah, so I do have those same concerns, Connor. I sit there and I look at how can you reasonably expect that for 42 minutes a night, Ben Simmons can hang with the best player in the world? How can you reasonably expect the guy who has played 8 regular season games in the second half and only a handful of playoff games, and he's not playing his normal 32 to 37 minutes, and when he is, he's not playing at a high level for 32 to 38 minutes, talking about Embiid now. How can you reasonably expect that he's going to be, as he self-proclaims himself to be, the best defensive player in the NBA? That you can't. Sustaining what they did in game 2 to me is so concerning, which makes Rob's points earlier about the failed executions on the offensive side to be so relevant. In order for this to actually go the Sixers' way over the length of this series, that the defensive intensity, in my opinion, and Connor, you share this, is not going to mirror what it was for the first 3.5 quarters of game 2. There's going to be some real legitimate concerns stretching in game 4, 5, 6, and 7 there. I think game 3, it's going to be a lot of energy. You had the extra day off. That helps. But it's going to be about, you're going to have to start knocking down some shots. You're going to need Tobias Harris to have one of those Tobias Harris nights where he goes, 6 of 8 from beyond, where he pops 24 or 26 points. You're going to need JJ Redick to hit another gear and start shooting the basketball the way that we know JJ can shoot. You're going to need Ben Simmons for as much defensive energy as he's putting on Kawhi. You're going to have to lean on him in transition to be that guy, to be that bulldog, to get into the paint and to not fear the free throw line. He can get to the line. He is bigger, faster, and stronger than everyone on the court, almost. He can get to the line, get to the rim, and get yourself to the line. 1 of 2 is better than nothing, and empty possessions. I don't care. You need to maximize the offensive talents going forward every single time down the court. We have 3-4 minutes left on the segment. We'll try to wrap it up here. Before we get to our final point of Joel Embiid, curious to see your X factor here in games 3 and 4. Who do you think is most integral to the Philadelphia 76ers' success in pulling out a win in one of or both of these games at home? We'll start with you, Rob.
I'm going to continue going off of what I said before. It's going to be Jimmy Butler. He's the guy. Toronto is going to force the Sixers into the half-court offense, which means Jimmy's going to be bringing the ball up. As I said, he's going to be more or less the captain of the offense. And you know what happened when he went out there and scored 30 points in game 2? They won. When he wasn't playing as well in game 1, they lost. So in order for the Sixers to win the series, I said it before and I'll say it again, they need Jimmy Butler to be out there and be the best Jimmy Butler that he can be. If he is, they'll win. If he's not, then it's going to be tough. So Jimmy Butler is my integral player for the Sixers.
And Connor, who do you have as your X factor for these 2 games?
Well, keeping it in the half-court offense, like Rob said, I'm going with Joel Embiid here. I think we need Joel Embiid to get in that post and grind out 25 points, 15 boards. He needs to come back to that regular season form. Like like we talk about being from Canada and the Raptors fans picking at me. One of the biggest things is they pick at me. They're like, "What's up with Joel Embiid? Is this is this the end for him?" Like I genuinely have concerns for him. But if he can bring back regular season Joel Embiid and put some of these doubters to sleep and put up another couple games of 25 points, 15 boards, 3 or 4 blocks, like really just do it on both ends of the court, that he'd be an immense X factor. We need that more than ever, and maybe Embiid should have played half the season and sat out more games, but he's got to kick it up a notch.
Just to be different, since both of you guys did not go, you each went with your own candidate here. I'm going to take Ben Simmons. To me, it's going to be about, Kawhi is going to get his, but you got to make him work for it. And you know that offense is going to basically continue to flow through the successes of what Kawhi is going to be. Pascal Siakam, I think he's a great player. I know some people think that he's maybe middle tier. I think he's pushing that upper tier. I think he is that legitimate of an athletic talent in the NBA, and especially in today's NBA. But you fear Kawhi. Ben Simmons is going to have to play 40-plus minutes a night, and he's going to have to mirror the defense that he played for 3.5 quarters in Game 2, but he's going to have to do it for quite possibly through to a Game 7, as you've both mentioned. Well, Rob, you said in 6 games. Connor, you said potentially going to a Game 7, and I agree. Ben Simmons on the defensive side first, and then his ability to maximize those opportunities that he does have in transition, and his willingness to get to the free throw line, his willingness to get guys in foul trouble, even if he's knocking down only 65% of free throws, 60% of free, I don't care. Get to the line. Don't fear that. Don't stray away from that. So for me, I'm going to go with Ben Simmons. Connor, before we go, Connor, you had mentioned something that that people up your way have been asking. What is going on with Joel Embiid? This is a very real concern for me. And I just real quick before we go, I wanted to get each of your take on it. So, no question, Joel Embiid was mismanaged through the entirety of this season. When you look at how many games he played, how many minutes he played early on, you get to that second half, and then you see he only played 8 games the rest of the way because he was played too much. This is a grind that for a guy who was still growing and who's battled injuries his entire career, that was too much. That needed to be managed more effectively. Setting aside the 76ers mismanagement of Joel Embiid himself seems to have absolutely no care for the way that he takes care of his body. We all hear it all the time. You can eat cheeseburgers and drink milkshakes and drink beer and do whatever you want when you're young because your metabolism's there and you're just going to work it off. And Joel Embiid is certainly still young. But what happens to that flirtatious high school girl, goes to college for 1 semester, comes back ballooned up looking fat as hell? Joel Embiid has that same mindset of this invincible, nothing's really going to change. I'm still going to be the biggest, fastest, strongest big in the NBA. Well, he's not. He can't stay on the court. And every single night, he is going to be a game time decision, whether it's going to be the knee or whether he can't get off the toilet. Something with Joel Embiid is going to be sitting there and have to go through Brett Brown's mind and his teammates' mind as to how are we going to effectively manage this game. How much concern do each of you guys have for Joel Embiid and his level of professionalism going forward for the Philadelphia 76ers, both in this series and beyond? Start with you, Connor.
Well, I know we've talked about the maturity of Simmons and Embiid and the fact that they're young and stuff, but they both have to pull it together and become like Jimmy.
You cut out there, kid.
Oh, sorry. I said
No worries.
Oh, hello?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. So we've talked about the maturity of Ben Simmons and Jimmy Butler, and they both have to grow up. I think they both have to become James Butler, as Brett Brown would say. Become the adult.
It's literally Jimmy. That was the best interview ever.
They literally have to mature. They have to become adults. They have to realize that they're professionals. This is what they're getting paid to do for the rest of their lives. I genuinely have concern for Embiid's knee going forward for the rest of his career. just as for football fans out there, people who are saying Todd Gurley's arthritis is nothing to worry about, I believe it is something to worry about, just as I believe Joel Embiid's knee is something to worry about for the rest of his career. So if he can be healthy in his eating habits and how he works out and how he handles himself in his daily life, I think it will only extend his career and only help issues with his knee going forward.
Rob, do you have any long-term concerns?
To an extent, I agree with Connor that there is some concern about his. I'm not as concerned as most people are about his knee, just because I think that, with age and with improving his maturity, that he is going to start getting himself on a better diet. But if he doesn't, then it's going to be a problem. If he doesn't do that, then I'll be concerned about it. But I think that he's going to get it together. Somebody within the organization is basically going to give him an ultimatum, more or less, that he needs to start taking better care of his body. And, if he does that, if he does start taking better care of his body, then everything will be all right. If he doesn't, then that's where things go wrong.
I agree. I have very, very real fears that Joel Embiid is just too immature and has too big of a personality to rein himself in and do the unsexy thing, and just not live this larger than life type of attitude and feel as though you're invincible. You're at the end of the day, you still have to have a level of professionalism and care towards what you do. It can't just be this fun personality that gets the crowd involved for 60 games a year and the other 22 he's out. Playoffs are questionable. He can't be dancing to whatever on a massage table, eating 14 Big Macs before a game. Like, this shit just can't happen, dollar in the swear jar. At some point, someone in this organization, and I actually think it should be a teammate before anything else. I think when a JJ Redick comes to you and says, hey, this is why I can still play 35 minutes a night if I need to in the playoffs, because I do this to get ready. This is my regimen. This is how I take care of myself. This is how I recover. This is how I eat. Here's my personal chef's name. He will cook for you too. Someone, a teammate here, needs to get in Joe's head and say, hey, we are only as good as you are going to take us. It's important that you care about that. Someone has to. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a decision that Joel Embiid makes for himself. And I question his maturity level as to whether or not he can make that right now. And with a guy who is as fragile as he is, I do fear that at a certain point it may be too late. And he may do some irreversible damage, whether it be to the knee or anything else. And that concerns me. So somebody needs to get in Joe's head and make him realize the level of professionalism that is needed to be an athlete at any level, anywhere, or anywhere on the professional level. But before we sign off here, Game 3 and 4 predictions. Rob, I think you mentioned earlier you think that they are going to win both games here in Philadelphia?
I did, yes. Like I said, I think Game 3 will be close. I think it goes down to the wire, maybe even the final possession. I think that if the Sixers win that one, then they'll be in Toronto's head a little bit, and Game 4 is a little bit more of a blowout.
I love the prediction. And Connor, what are your thoughts on the Games 3 and 4 in Philly?
I think we're going to come out with a split. I mean, even like how bad we played in Game 1, we lost by like 13 points. So I think we're going to see the rest of the games going forward are going to be close. I think the majority, I'd actually say the rest of the 5 games are going to be within 10 points. And I think we split in Philadelphia. I think we take Game 3 coming off that day of rest, extra day of rest, and being at home. And then Game 4 goes to Toronto, and then we split the rest of the way and we take it in 7.
So I also think we split, but I think we lose Game 3. I think that we're going to see a similar game to Game 1 in Brooklyn, where we just fell apart at home and were basically booed off our court. But that was what this team needed to propel themselves to then win 4 straight. I think that it's another difficult, to say the least, Game 3 here. And I think things don't go so well for the 76ers. And then I think they just can't stop winning after that. And I don't think that stops just at Game 4, 5, and 6 in this series. but I think Eastern Conference Finals as well. I think one more time to be embarrassed on your home floor, and I question whether or not the 76ers lose a game the rest of the playoffs, at least until you get to the NBA Finals. My confidence levels has been varying here, even throughout this show segment, but that's where I'm at with the Philadelphia 76ers. That's going to pretty much conclude things here for this episode of TJ's One of Us here at the Always Next Year podcast studios. Connor, it was awesome having you on from Canada again. Any of our listeners who listen to this segment but do not listen to Connor's two other segments, Crossing Borders or Kelly Green Hour with LJ. Connor, once again, where can we find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Connor10, and that's TEN, and thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man, I can't wait to do this more often. Rob, where can we find you?
At radio_Rob.
All right, and you can find me, the host of this segment for tonight, Shane_Mead. And before we go, I mentioned it earlier on our Philadelphia Phillies segment. Those of you who listen to us and you are from the Southampton, Warminster area, Fat Jack passed this morning, dear uncle of mine, one of my good friends. I know half of you guys know him as well from all of the different bars here in the area. And if you're in Sea Isle, you also know him from there. So do not think of anything poorly. Have a beer and enjoy any of the memories that Jack may have instilled in some of you guys. We're going to sign off here for the Always Next Year podcast studios. You can find us on Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, and anywhere else that you listen to your podcasts. You can also find our podcast Twitter at ANY Podcast. And you can also find us on our website, www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com.